Hello again everybody and welcome to this quick look at the newly released in open beta format Focke-Wulf 190 Dora. It's the D9 long-nosed variant, meaning it has the Jumo 213 engine installed. It was fielded first in, I guess, late 1944 and saw action in 44 and 45. It was designed primarily to be a high-speed, high-altitude interceptor against bombers over the continent, but in practice it was employed mainly as a fighter and sometimes as a fighter-bomber and was considered to be a pretty fair match against the P-51 Mustangs of the time and also the late model Spitfires that it went up against. So let me go ahead and jump into the cockpit and have a quick look at some of the features that we have here in the Dora. And after entering the cockpit and flying it around for a few minutes, I can tell that it's your typical DCS level simulation. All the switches, all the gauges, all the dials, all the levers function as one would expect. And from reading the manual over the last few days, it looks like all the systems that were available in this model Dora from the time frame are going to be modeled and fully functional. And it looks like a lot of attention to detail has again been put into this aircraft, so yeah, I'm looking forward to trying them all out, and I will get to every system in the aircraft during the test flight series, which is going to be coming up over the next 2 to 3 weeks. And overall, the handling of the aircraft seems to match what I would expect from a 190. You know, it's extremely agile, especially in roll. You know, if flown correctly, it retains airspeed during the turns. It also turns fairly well for, you know, as one would expect for a Focke-Wulf 190 of this design. And, you know, I get the feeling, you know, just from playing around with the engine and just seeing how it accelerates, you know, going from low speed to high speed like I am right now. Yeah, the engine seems to be very, very responsive, as one would expect. And I even have the MW50 water methanol injector that I can click on right now for an extra boost. So yeah, that should be extremely useful, especially up at high altitudes when it comes to chasing down the Mustangs or trying to chase down whatever it is that I need to chase down, or get away if I'm being chased, which is more likely going to be the case. So let me switch off the boost real quick. And overall, the visibility is a lot better than I was expected, frankly. The visibility out the front I was expecting to be hampered a little bit more than I am from the design of the nose. And like I mentioned before, this is the long-nosed variant, and at high angles of attack, low airspeed, and especially during ground handling, the nose is going to be difficult to see around or see over. And I'm finding that, you know, when the aircraft is trimmed out and is flying at high speed like you would be during combat, that, yeah, visibility over the nose and around the nose is not an issue whatsoever. And also that the visibility around the canopy framing up around the nose is no issue at all. And especially since you can move around and, you know, like you can with Track IR and DCS, yeah, you got no issues for visibility out the front, and great visibility to the side and to the rear, as you should have in the Focke-Wulf 190 of this design. It has the bulged plexiglass canopy, so very little obstruction unless you're looking straight up. Yeah, just great visibility overall from the Dora. Now, the primary armaments built into the Dora, I have two 13mm guns mounted on the nose, and I have two 20mm guns mounted in the wing roots. So one thing to keep in mind with these is, since we do have two different types of guns with different ammo, is that especially at long range, and I'll just turn around here into the target area and fire a quick burst, I can see that I have two different colors of tracers coming out, representing the different types of ammunition that are coming out of the two variants of gun. So taking into account where the different types of ammunition are going to hit on the ground, or how they're going to fly in relation to the target, especially at long range in the air, is going to be something to work out. But it's, you know, if you're firing like you ideally would from close range on air-to-air targets, it's not going to be a factor. You just need to, you know, get close enough so that the different drops of the different types of bullets aren't that much of a factor. And then for air-to-ground employment, you just have to, especially from long range, just take into account what your intended target is and figure, okay, do I need to get the 13mm or do I need to go for the 20mm onto the target, and adjust from there. And of course, you know, getting in close never hurts, but if you do want to maintain range, it is something to keep in mind that you are going to have different trajectories for the bullets depending on which gun they're coming out of. And I mentioned earlier that the 190D was also used in air-to-ground role fairly extensively in the late war time frame. And on this mission, I brought it up with a single 500kg bomb mounted on the centerline station. I also have the option to put four 50kg bombs onto a bomb rack a little like a multiple ejector rack set up. So I'm finding also that it's a very stable bombing platform. So if I set up on a target, it's very easy to maintain track on the target and to fly the intended path. So let me just come up here and set up for a quick dive bombing run on one of these targets, and I'll show a rudimentary bombing pass. And what I'll do on this pass is just turn and bomb these vehicle targets out here, so I don't have to be too precise to have it look presentable. But it's your standard dive bombing run, so I'll just chop the throttle, roll in on the target area, and I'm going to use the gun sight at the 0 range setting. I'll talk a little bit more about the use of the gun sight. So I'll just set up on this last vehicle out here, set up in a dive, release the weapon, pull out, and see how that does. So a little bit long, but on the rollout and as I was trying to track the target on the way down, very stable. So this is going to be an excellent air-to-ground platform, I can already tell, for both gunnery and bombing. Now the gun sight that we have in the Dora is the EZ42. It's a fairly advanced, or actually very advanced for the time, lead computing optical gun sight. I have a dial that I can use to set the wingspan of the expected target, which in this case is going to be P-51 Mustang, so I'll go ahead and set that to about 11.3. And I also have on my throttle a twist grip. So I have that assigned now to a slider that I'm going to be using to adjust the range. And you'll see as I get up and run an intercept on a P-51 here in just a second that the idea is that you set it to the wingspan of the expected threat, and then you maneuver so that the aircraft fits into this reticule. And then you use the range adjustment feature to keep the aircraft within the confines of the sight, and that's going to ensure that the proper amount of lead is given and calculated by the sight depending on the range. So that's the theory, and it works identically actually to the sight that's in the DCS P-51 and somewhat identically to the F-86 sight when it's used in the manual mode. And I mentioned when talking about air-to-ground that we have two types of bombs that we can use. And historically, the D-9 variant was used with rockets, and although it's not modeled for now in the open beta, I wouldn't be surprised if we do see rockets as an option later on after the aircraft is released in the full-up version. So, talking about different systems that we have modeled, we also have a radio that's modeled. It's a 4-channel VHF FM type radio that also gives a rudimentary directional finding capability so that we can use the radio for both communications and navigation. And when I get into the test flight series, I'll be using that to its full extent, I'm sure. And just coming around the cockpit and looking at the overall layout, I have controls for landing gear and trim, flap controls right here, engine controls right here around the throttle. I have your main flight instruments right here on the main panel, bombing and rocketry instruments down here on the bottom console, the gun sight and gunnery instruments right up here around the gun sight like you would expect. Coming around, oxygen equipment, I have electrical controls, engine starter, and you can see that as you go around the cockpit, it's very well laid out and very well thought out, and that was one of the notable features of the 190 at the time, and still it was one of the very first cockpits where accessibility of controls and the overall flow and setup of the cockpit was very much taken into account during the design. And approaching the aerial targets that I have out here, it's a P-51 that I have set up just to orbit and make this very easy on me. I've already got the wingspan set up to the wingspan of the P-51, so now all I have to do is adjust the range dial so that the gun sight reticule is the same size as the P-51. Now I can count on it providing me the proper lead angle to provide, if I were maneuvering, the proper lead to pull on the aircraft. So this deflection angle, which is 0, all I have to do is line up the sight, squeeze off the rounds, and I can count on rounds being on target. And if I come around and start to maneuver a little bit, I can see that I'm getting updates for the lead that I need to pull. So if I come off just from a slightly different angle here, I'll try to show what I'm talking about. You can see as I'm starting to pull lead that it's putting the sight into a different position, giving me updates on where the proper place is. I'm at a longer range now, so I need to adjust it. Fire off the rounds, and that is, generally speaking, how you use the sight. And I guess just one more basic observation about the aircraft before I bring this one to a close, and that is that, not surprisingly at all the cockpit indications and text on the cockpit are in German. which I was expecting to cause maybe just a little bit of a problem when it came to figuring out what does what and what the function of the dials and the switches are. But like I mentioned earlier, the cockpit is so well laid out and just so well thought out in the layout that I'm finding that's not the case at all. That I have no trouble at all figuring out how to work the indications and how to work the different systems and decipher the different indications. And of course, just a little bit of basic German doesn't hurt either. Just knowing, Aus und Ein and Hinter and Varder. Just basic words like that can really give you a very good idea of, what does what. So, yeah, no issues at all with the cockpit or deciphering the cockpit. Now, Russian cockpits, on the other hand, I can't say that I'm so lucky, but we'll get to that when we get to the MiG-21. So let me just close this video out with a quick air-to-ground employment. I'll employ some guns against some air-to-ground targets out here. I have the strafe pits set up, so let me push up the throttles and come in from a general dive angle. And again, I'm just going to use the basic setting of the sight. It's almost in like a fixed setting with the range set all the way down to the lowest setting. Okay, so we're approaching the target, and like I said, it's a very, very stable platform. And at speeds like this, high speeds, it's very, very easy to maintain trim. And very, very easy to control in the air-to-ground roll, and I would imagine in the air-to-air roll, if I ever do get an interest in that and try it in the air-to-air roll as well. So folks, I'm going to close this one out here. This is just a quick look at the aircraft, and if you know my videos, the Test Flight series and the On the Range series are going to go into a lot more detail on aircraft systems and aircraft operations, so look for those to start rolling out here over the next couple of weeks. Maybe not with the same compressed schedule as I did on the F-86 or some of the other series, but this is definitely an interesting aircraft and one that I want to cover in a lot of detail. So folks, thanks again for watching, and I will see you next time.